Hello and welcome to our program, Innovation in the Storefront. My name is Karen Romano. I'm the current president of the Book Industry Guild of New York. Some months ago, when things started to shut down rather suddenly, we all really had to focus on our immediate need to get things working sort of upstream and keep things moving in a virtual environment. And then as the months went on and we got much better at making books and doing things completely virtually, we began to focus a little bit more on what was happening downstream. So how are we reaching customers? What trends were emerging as we were spending more and more time at home, and issues of social justice were coming to the forefront. Finally, we're looking now at how we're welcoming people back to the storefront. We have a great panel tonight, and thanks to the wonders of Zoom, we're able to call on people from across the country. So allow me to introduce our moderator for the evening, Brittany Lewis, who comes to us all the way from Colorado, and will be running this meeting for us tonight. Brittany has worked in the publishing industry for 15 years and has a diverse background, bringing new software solutions to book publishers, managing book retailer relationships, and developing marketplace insights for publishers. Today, she manages publisher services and distribution for LSC's book division and directs marketing strategies on behalf of publisher clients for LSC's marketing group. Apart from work, Brittany enjoys reading books to her kids, eating barbecue and tacos, and spending time with her family in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. There is one minor housekeeping thing that I forgot to mention up front, and that is when you are asking questions, I have been asked to remind people to use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and not the chat. So forgive me, Brittany, I'm going to turn this over to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. I'm glad to participate. I'm very excited about this discussion. Myself and the panelists have all spoken, and we have a lot of really great, interesting topics that we're going to cover tonight. Before we dive in on what's happening on the storefront and innovation at the storefront, I want to introduce our panelists. So I'm going to introduce everyone one at a time and also ask them to share a few words themselves. So first we have Kalima DeSuze. Kalima is a mother, daughter of immigrants, U.S. Army veteran, social worker, activist, and bookstore owner. As an Afro-Latina Black feminist, she stands at the intersection of many identities that impact her personally, professionally, and politically. DeSuze uses books as common ground to build authentic relationships, initiate dialogue, and educate. Thank you, Kalima, for joining. Now we have Stacey Lewis. Stacey has worked at City Lights Booksellers and Publishers in San Francisco for 25 years. She currently serves on a committee choosing the next poet laureate of San Francisco. Stacey lives in Berkeley with her family. Thank you, Stacey, for joining. We have Pete Mulvil, who grew up as a library kid in the DC suburbs. He attended college in Colorado before moving to San Francisco in 1993, working as a temp for Green Apple Books. 3 years later, he bought the store that is now a Publishers Weekly Bookstore of the Year, and he lives by the beach with his family and regularly swims, surfs, and rows on the San Francisco Bay. Thank you, Pete, for joining.
Thanks for having me.
And then last we have Charley Rejsek, who's been a bookseller since 1998, has been a staple in the Austin, Texas literary scene since 2007. She's been general manager at BookPeople, the quintessential bookstore in Austin, Texas, since 2019. Thank you, Charley.
Thank you.
Kalima, is there anything else that you would like to say before we jump in? And then we'll go around the group of panelists for more of an introduction to everyone who's attending tonight, and then dive into our topic.
No, I'm ready to go.
All right. Stacey, thanks for joining. Anything from you?
Hey, good to be here. Ready to answer your questions. Got coffee.
Great. All right. And Pete and Charley.
Yeah, I'm ready to go. I can't see Stacey from right here, but we're close. It's good to have some West Coast representing on the East Coast. And I'm just happy to be here and see other booksellers.
Right.
Same thing. I'm happy to be on a panel of such great people, and I'm ready to get started.
Okay. Well, let's dive right in. It's an understatement to say that a lot has changed this year. Everyone in the book world and the book community has been impacted, all the way to our consumers, the people who are buying and reading books every day. So we're going to walk through a lot of the changes and ask each of the panelists to speak to their particular experience of what they've seen change being on the front lines as bookstore managers, owners, and booksellers. So obviously, I think it goes without saying this year, 2020, that in-store traffic has changed, right? With the challenges that COVID has brought, more people are home, less people are out and about. Some people don't feel comfortable going out and about. And how has this changed the indie bookstore front? Are more customers wanting to buy from you online? What big pivots have you had to make in such a short period of time with all of these changes this year?
Who do you want to go first?
Jump in there, Kalima. You have made a lot of changes around innovation and had to adapt quickly. So why don't you start us off?
We have. So Café con Libros is interesting because we are in Brooklyn, New York, and New York was one of the hardest hit places in the nation at the start of COVID. And the other part of that is Café con Libros, it's on a side street. So in terms of drawing traffic, it has been, for 2.5 years, it's been very difficult. However, with COVID, it's been interesting that so many of our customers are now home from work. And so we see more of them during the week and during the daytime than we normally would see if it weren't COVID, because we're on a side street where we're not in any close distance to a major trainway. So they would have to walk past us to get to the train. Now they have all the time in the world. The flip side of that is that we also have a lot of our community members who aren't necessarily from New York. And so this is a very transitory community. And so what it means that they also sometimes can't come into the bookstore because they want to quarantine to be able to see their families. So we've had an uptick in foot traffic because folks are home, which has been interesting, but also a little bit of a drawback and like hesitation and lots of questions around like how we are keeping folks safe and keeping the space clean so that folks can feel comfortable coming into the bookstore. And we've done a lot of work around trying to communicate with our customers. One of the main things that we've done is to really be transparent and open in our newsletters. I started a newsletter way back when, but I wasn't really keeping up with it. But during COVID, it became critical to write every single week about what was happening at the bookstore, to keep them informed, to really show my complete honest to God feelings about what was happening, to encourage our community to feel like we are each other's keepers. That's what I kept telling them. We are each other's keepers. We are not expendable. If one of you go missing, it is going to impact us all, and that our entire safety is dependent upon one another. So when you come to the bookstore, when you're hanging out in the community, it doesn't matter what you're doing to be safe, be prudent, and think about us all as a community. And I did a lot of communicating that through our e-newsletter so that they knew that I was taking their safety and the safety of their family very seriously, because I was also talking about the safety of my own family in relationship to theirs, since we are a community.
Thanks, Kalima. Now, part of what we talked about as a group is that every one of you and your stores have been impacted differently because of geographical differences, and how COVID is impacting the communities differently because of that. So, Charley, your store is not on a side street in New York City. So how has traffic for you changed? And have you seen people coming to the store less or demanding more from you in an online presence?
Yeah. Definitely. So I'm in the opposite of Kalima. We just turned 50 years old this year as a bookstore. So we have the massive amount of community support that want to support us. But the challenge was, how could we fulfill the needs that they had in a way that could support us safely? And so as far as customers buying from the storefront online, like, we basically forced them to, we had to shut down our website, kind of put our ducks in a row, figure out how to run 100% of our business through the website, through the stay-at-home order that we had. And so over the past 8 months, we've just built out multiple different business models. And at this point, because we're so deep into it, we've learned how to divert the customers into the business model that we need it to be in. So we have a business model for mail out, we have a business model for curbside, and we have a business model for shopping in the store. And our community supporters, they can do any of those three, whatever makes them feel the safest. But in trying to fulfill online book fairs and events and other sales initiatives that we're trying to do, we're kind of diverting our customers online, because that is the safest right now, to have the least amount of exposure, as well as I have booksellers working in those positions ready to fulfill those orders.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And Stacey and Pete, what are you experiencing in San Francisco, an entirely different area of the country?
Yeah, I mean, well, mid-March, City Lights bookstore closed, like a lot of businesses in San Francisco. And so we actually had no way of making money, because our mail order system was very much tied to the physical bookstore. So we did a couple of things. One was we ran a very successful GoFundMe campaign, which has really sustained us. Another entity that we relied on quite a bit was bookshop.org. Those folks really came through, and we appreciate that. We were able to open the store in the beginning of June. And so it's been radically reorganized. There's a new entrance. There's a person who greets you immediately and reminds you to sanitize your hands and wear your mask. Traffic is very much coordinated by staff in the store. That level of crowd control is something that, none of us had to deal with before. And as far as, website sales go, we are in the middle of relaunching a website, which will really, I think, be key as we go forward, because we never know what's going to happen, if the store is going to need to close again. We need a way to make money, frankly. And as far as connecting with our audience, social media has been absolutely key. It is the way that we're connecting with folks, different demographics on the different platforms: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Newsletters are also important, being frank about where we're at, how business is down. Another thing also, we're in the North Beach neighborhood of San Francisco, which is normally a very heavily touristed area, but of course tourism doesn't exist anymore. So we're really trying to remind San Franciscans and Bay Area people that you can always be a tourist in your own city. I mean, living in San Francisco, I always felt like I could detach and have that experience. Great cities, afford that. We've partnered with Vesuvios, which is an historic bar that we share on an alley in North Beach. The alley was named Jack Kerouac Alley. So Vesuvios put out tables, and we have a drink special going that if you buy a book at City Lights, you could show your receipt and get a special drink at Vesuvios. So really trying to, work with neighbors, remind locals we're here, but continuing the message to, all the folks who love City Lights all over the world that we're here. we need you to shop with us, shop early. We're all over that, October, November is the new whatever. So, shop early so we can get all the books and merch that you want. But it's a constantly evolving model. We are, offering online, curbside, and really trying to remind people that City Lights is open and City Lights is ready to meet all your needs. There's plenty of space. Crowds have not been an issue, and I think that's been a really important part of the messaging. Is the store is open every day, noon to 8. We want folks to come and shop and feel comfortable, and we're following all the safety regulations.
Great. Pete, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, pretty similar to what everybody else has said. Our website used to be somewhere between 1% and 2% of our sales. And then as of March 16th, it was 100% of our sales. It took us, we've had an indie commerce site through the ABA for 11 years. And in that time, we had not done $1 million. And then in the next 6 months, we did $1 million. So the move to online was huge and complete. If Ingram had not been our fulfillment partner, I don't know what we would have done. So we're really grateful that that existed. All the time we spent over the years building up our social media channels, building an email newsletter list were super valuable. We increased our email newsletter frequency to twice a week because people were home and they were bored and they needed something to read and something to do. Once we reopened and things got closer to normal, which they aren't, and I don't know when they'll be, we reduced it back to 1 day a week because the open rates were going down and people seemed less engaged. We just tried all kinds of things on the website. We made lists. We used to just put our website there and think, if people come and buy a book, great. But we didn't have a lot of lists, or it wasn't really interesting to look at. It was a good place to buy something if you knew what you wanted, but there was no browse functionality. So we created all these different lists and tried to update them. We added a donation button only because customers asked. We didn't plan on doing it unless or until we had to. But people were literally asking us, how can I give you money? So we didn't get a ton of donations, but we put a button there. We made sure that our Libro pages were up to date for audiobooks. We had people asking about Kobo. It's unfortunate that the partnership there isn't great, but we did have some people buying ebooks. We updated our bookshop.org page to try to steer people back to our website from Bookshop, so that they knew that the best way to support us was through that. We had a local author, Dave Eggers, whose artwork is right behind me. And he volunteered to do an original drawing for any customer that ordered $200 or more on our website. And he would mail them a Dave Eggers drawing. So we just sort of took anything that came towards us, any idea we could have, and we threw it all against the wall, hoping it would work. We finally started e-gift codes, which we had resisted for years. We used to have just physical gift cards. Those were really successful. We continued to do events online, which I think helped keep our connections to the poor authors whose orphan books were coming out at that terrible time, and keep our relationships with publishers so that, next year, whenever we can do in-person events again, we're still on their radar. And one idea we stole from a Third Place Books in Seattle, they had a button. We offered free shipping for any book over, sorry about that, free shipping for any book for any purchase over $30. He said that he added a button that said, I'm happy to contribute the cost of shipping. So even when customers did qualify for free shipping, a lot of them chose to give us an extra $5. It was almost like a tip jar or something. So we did all that. We also did a t-shirt, Stay Home Read Books t-shirt through Bonfire, which is a great company in one of the Carolinas that would take all our orders and then print them once every 10 days and ship them out to customers. And we raised some real decent money from there. We actually made more money on those t-shirts than we did on donations. So we just through an accumulation of 50 different things, which is kind of how I think indie bookstores survive it all. And if we ever go away, it's going to be death by 1,000 cuts. So I think we've survived these last 6 months by trying everything we possibly could.
Well, and that's a great point. I mean, because we're talking about innovating at the storefront, and the realities is that you have had to do that in such a short period of time. Was part of another conference and event this morning where they were talking about accelerating changes. What COVID has forced, and people being at home and lifestyle and buying habits, all of that changing so quickly. It's forced all of you to make a lot of changes very quickly. Whereas without a pandemic, you would have done that over maybe a 5-year span. right? Now you're doing it in a 5-month span. So many of you have had something to say about that, the challenge as a bookstore manager or owner. Is there anything else that, this is for any of you, that you would add to that topic of all the extra work and new things you've had to put in place and things you've had to change or adapt and rapidly?
Yeah. Charlie, you want to go?
No, you go, Kalima, you got it.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, Charlie and I were reflecting on this in our prep session. We were talking about the ways in which some of our customers want to push to start their own system within our bookstores. And, you know, we live in a culture that says that the customer is always right and that you have to like bend and yield to the customer. And I personally do feel that sense of like, oh, maybe I should try it this way, or maybe, you know, but then to think about all the different things that we have to do in that singular moment to make that one change for that customer, and then the impact on the staff, myself, on the ways in which our already existing systems are operating, it has been very difficult. And it has been, you know, it has been in a place where we have to set a boundary and say, no, we can't do this, right? And I also think sometimes, you know, in my circle, people will push back and they'll say like, you're being too rigid. You know, this is how you can make money. And it's always about like chasing that dollar. And I appreciate that because we have to pay the bills. And I always try to center self-care and my mental health in that equation as well. And so sometimes change is good and sometimes is not good at that rapid rate, that we need to scale back and like have a different type of conversation with our customers and our community and help them to understand that it's not rigidity that they're experiencing, it's scaling at a sustainable pace and speed that matters the most. And if they really care about us as a community, not just me, as the entire community, then I can't go in this direction right now, but I will definitely write it down and parking lot it until I have the space to think more deeply about it.
And to piggyback on that, everything that, yes, every idea that someone has, which is always a great idea, the very first thing is logistics, to your point, Kalima. You know, someone sends me a picture of this, you know, amazing box with this amazing sticker on it. Can we have the sticker? And I'm like, well, but did they put the box with the sticker inside of another box, or they put the shipping label on top of that? Right? So you have to think about every one of those things. And it's not natural as independent booksellers to not to say no to the customer. And that has been one of the biggest challenges in this changing environment, is bringing the booksellers along with all of the changes, communicating all of the changes, and making them feel comfortable, pushing the customer where we need them to go, and not trying to say yes to every single system that we don't have in place. Yeah.
And Brittany, I think one of the things that accelerated, obviously the move to online shopping accelerated. And there was a sweet spot for a little while there where Amazon had deprioritized the shipment of books, which helped us even further. And then libraries were closed. So the real diehards, you know, they needed their fix and they could only come to us. But I feel like the shop local movement also accelerated by 5 years in the same 3 months. People saw their stores in their neighborhood shuttered, and they thought through what will happen to these businesses? What will happen if I don't spend my money there? So I think the shop local movement also got a big bump in this period because people could really visualize and see what a neighborhood looks like when the coffee shop and the bar and the grocery store and the bookstore are all closed. So if there's an upside to all this and the accelerated changes that have been happening, you know, perhaps that's one for those who choose optimism. Perhaps that's one that we can look forward to.
Right. And then just that pivot to online shopping, you know, the internet and the web has a tendency to make things look easy, right? Because it's really accessible. You just click a few buttons, but for you guys, it's not. So is there any more light you could shed on that for those listening in, of all the work and changes behind the scenes?
Yeah, I will say, just like Pete, we had a fraction of our business online, and overnight it went 100%. And I had been at the store for 4 months, and the first thing I realized was that there was no one person that worked on the website. You had someone who ran the orders, you had someone who added events, you had someone who would add a book list, but we just wanted to put a statement on the home page. There was no one to knew how to do that. So that the very first thing that I thought was I need a webmaster. And so I created a position and hired someone from in-house, and just devoting 40 hours of someone's time to learn our website changed my life. It changed our companies. It gave us goals to work towards. It opened up the opportunities that we didn't know we had. And then the next step was, as Pete said, indie commerce websites are not really set up to be like a bookstore where you browse. And so we had to redesign our website to make it more easily to be browsable. And so now what we relaunched, months long massive project of redesigning a website, and then it launched, and now we're just having to learn how to project manage all of the book list on there, because no one really owned those kinds of projects before. And so with every new innovation comes with new store systems, but it's been one of the best things that we have put as an investment moving forward, is to be able to make our online space much more easily shoppable and updated.
And we're still discovering blind spots. I feel like we did all this work on our website and made it better, and then I realized that our mobile was terrible. And it's because I'm not really a person who uses websites on my phone. And so literally, because I don't do that very often, the mobile website for Green Apple Books was awful. So it took me a little while to get into the data of Google Analytics and see what was working and what wasn't. And then I realized we had to do that, and then we did that. And literally, I spent $1,000 on a designer to upgrade the mobile and make it simpler. And our sales, our conversion rate doubled within a couple of weeks on the mobile. So we're all still learning. We still have blind spots, and we're still scrambling to catch up.
Right. And
go ahead, Kalima.
I know. So this thing about fulfillment is interesting, because I think that as a Black-owned, woman-owned bookstore, I had a very different experience, possibly from most folks on the panel this summer. And so beyond COVID, we had the incident, the murder of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, where, like you said, the internet can take something and it could take you to another level in a matter of minutes, because that's exactly what happened to a lot of Black-owned bookstores in the nation. We went from being completely ignored or just unknown, or to be in the center conversation for over a couple of days and weeks. And that was very difficult for a lot of our stores, because our stores don't have the fulfillment infrastructure that type of demand needed. So our response times, and I can just be specifically for Café con Libros, a small community feminist bookstore, did not have the infrastructure. And we relied heavily on Ingram, who themselves did not have the books in stock. And they were relying on publishers who themselves did not have those books printed. So, and I think like one of the main things is the reason why I focus so much on our e-newsletters, because I think in an Amazon world, it is natural to get your book in either 8 hours to 2 days. And when you order from an indie bookstore, that's not going to always be your experience. And when everything blew up in the summertime, it was even further compounded. So we had to really explain to people that when 1,000 of you are placing an order for the same book on the same day at the same time, there is no way any store in the United States of America has 1,000 of the same books in their bookstore. We don't have that space. And so we're relying on a distributor to give it to us. And then we had to explain to them that the distributor has run out because the publishers did not print, or they didn't anticipate this. And I think that, in terms of fulfillment, it was a long process. And it was like relationship building and explaining the book industry to our customers and our community. Otherwise, I don't really know how we would have survived this summer because of that. And thank God, again, like so many of you have mentioned Bookshop. Yes, Bookshop came in. I knew about Bookshop, but very tangentially. And if it weren't for them, we would not have been able to survive much of the summer, because they do order fulfillment from A to Z, and is really a support to independent bookstores. But again, bookshop can be as great as they want to be, Ingram didn't have the books because the publishers didn't have the books. And it was a complete mess. And it was a lot of negative commentary about Black-owned bookstores this summer. And I feel like, the book industry could have done a better job. The newspapers could have done a better job at explaining that this all came all at once, and no one, absolutely no one under the sun was prepared for it.
And that's a good point, Kalima, and kind of a good segue on trends, right? We've talked about COVID being at home and how that's impacted your businesses and has created this need for you to pivot and invest and innovate in these new things. But then trends, what's trending? And some trends unanticipated, right? So whether people are coming to the store and buying, physically, or whether they're buying virtually, what are some book trend impacts that you've seen? Thank you for starting that topic, Kalima.
We've noticed so far that we're selling more copies of a fewer number of titles. I think that the discovery that usually happens in an independent bookstore, and one of our reasons to exist, is compromised right now because so many people are shopping on our website. It's, we have about 80% of our business is in store, so people are coming in still. And so people do discover, but mostly they kind of walk around, they take a quick look, they grab a couple things and they go. We don't necessarily even want people lingering for an hour or two the way they used to. So I feel like we're loading up on those big titles that we know everyone's going to want, and the ones that we believe in too, that maybe other stores don't care about or aren't promoting. But so far, and the website has also showed us that people want books that we don't sell a lot of. We have a very small romance section, but we sold a ton of romance over the summer. And coming out of that, we thought we need a bigger romance section. I don't see any huge long-term trends, but it does seem like for us right now, we're selling more copies of fewer titles, which isn't great for the industry and isn't, our passion, but that's the way it is at the moment. And we just hope to sort of learn from what's selling online and bring that back into the store to better serve our community.
Yeah,
I would say it sounds like it's similar at City Lights. To get ready for this conversation, I spoke to Paul Yamazaki, who's celebrating his 50th anniversary actually at City Lights as buyer. And he's actually working remotely. I'm working remotely. So some of my perspective on these things is sort of a bird's eye view. But I mean, according to him, the categories that City Lights was strong in continues to sell. I mean, City Lights was a place you would go and you knew you'd find progressive politics and literary fiction, serious nonfiction, titles that are now falling under the category of Black Lives Matter. Authors like Franz Fanon, Angela Davis, Claudia Rankin, Robin D.G. Kelley, Roxane Gay. These are authors whose books sell well at City Lights all the time. And the demand only grew. So in a sense, there is in somewhat not a change, but also, I mean, the book sales are down radically. A lot of titles that you'd hope to have 3 copies of, you've now phased out and you have a single copy. I mean, the shelves of City Lights bookstore, they look radically different, and it'll take a couple of years to get back up to the level of inventory we had back in March. Some of the big titles at City Lights, An American Genocide, about the genocide of California Indians by Benjamin Madley. Local authors, this is a great time for local authors to come in and partner. I'm distracted by Dave Eggers' drawing behind your head, Pete. He had done a similar thing for City Lights when we had the GoFundMe, that he would offer something up to big donors. Also, local authors Gary Kamiya and Paul Madonna have this really beautiful graphic novel called Spirits of San Francisco, and City Lights has sold 120 copies. Part of that is obviously the subject matter. It's very local, it's regional, and then Gary Kamiya lives in the neighborhood and came by and signed copies. Another big book, The Dead Are Arising, The Life of Malcolm X by Les Payne, and then also our staff picks. There's really, the staff picks can turn a little book into a big thing, and that people are still paying attention, whether it's in store or online. Those are the places we're seeing growth. So in a way, the buying habits haven't really changed, because I think City Lights is kind of an idiosyncratic sort of place to begin with. It's just at a much smaller scale.
Charley, yeah, I was gonna ask you to jump in there because you've spoken a lot about how people will buy what you put in front of them. So give us your perspective.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback on what Stacey just said, in that when we closed, what we realized, what our community was missing was our booksellers and our booksellers' recommendations. And so one of the things that we were trying to figure out, how do we fulfill that need without having customers in the store? And you know, you can have an email and all of these different things, a chat function on the website. But what we came up with was basically BookPeople in a box, to where you can choose anywhere from 1 to 5 books, paperback, hardcover, whatever you want. You answer some questions, you drop your Goodreads in there, and then we just crowdsource all of the selections to our booksellers. And that's how it's sold. It's like our booksellers are basically taking the information you would give them in the store and handpicking these books for you. And it's just a whole team of people in the store that contribute depending on the topic. And as with everything, we launched it and we had a system in place, and then it took off. And then we had to take a step back and put more systems in place. But that's part of the connection. We have such a strong community, and we have booksellers that have, just like at City Lights, that have been in my store since late 80s, early 90s. And the community wants the connection with those booksellers. And with the website redesign, we were able to create staff pages, which we've never had before, which make a large difference.
Charley, I love that you're using the Amazon-owned Goodreads to sell more books to indie customers. That's the best.
I just can't find another way to, get everyone. I'm like,
Great.
yeah. Good.
We do what we have to.
Yeah.
Well, you know, on the topic of kind of what is selling, right? We've talked about how demand and there not being supply. We've talked about merchandising and changing that, events, author signings, those sort of things. This is for all of you. Is there anything you can share around how that has changed and how you see that continuing or changing in the future, or maybe not in the near future?
I've been part of a little team that's really transformed the City Lights events program into a completely virtual series. We gave it a new name, City Lights Live. It is challenging. It's I convene actually every few months with booksellers around the country who are also doing events to kind of get feedback on what's working. I mean, most independent booksellers around events, they'll probably tell you that sales aren't great, and that you could have like 200 attendees, but then, you know, maybe sell like 10 books. It's a hard landscape to navigate. We just started adding a place where people could donate when they signed up for an event through the service Eventbrite. That was something that was recommended to us by other independent booksellers. I feel like it's really important to talk to other booksellers to get ideas about what's working, or also to understand if something is not working for you, it's also like across the board. That's the issue. It's not just you. You're not actually doing anything wrong. It's just the virtual events format it's just a challenging place to be. And another idea we had also was getting signed book plates. And that is super challenging, because the idea that you could, you know, if you're doing like one event a week, to actually time it so that the author would send you their signed book plates, and then those go into the mail with the book in a timely manner, it's quite difficult. City Lights is a publisher. We've been able to do that, you know, for the authors that we publish, because it's a little easier to coordinate. Like we are the publisher and the bookseller, but to coordinate with other publishers, you know, it just depends on a publicist you're working with, a timing. I mean, there's a lot of variables. So I thought that was gonna be my big brainstorm, and I was gonna save our events program with the book plates, but again, it's trial and error.
And I'll go next if that's okay. We had to really think hard about this, and we still are, in the fact of that we're known for 300 plus events a year. We're the we're the bookseller for South by Southwest. We're the bookseller for Texas Book Festival. And how do you support your community partners in this time period? Because we're a business, we made, just like you said, we had to change really fast. And a lot of our community partners were trying to, you know, they waited out. What is it going to look like? Do I really need to go virtual? And, you know, connecting with them and seeing what their plans were and how we could best support them. And then that also is what led into the website redesign. You know, if you think that you're going to have a whole festival on the ground, my booksellers really aren't feeling safe in that environment. So what we're going to offer is this digital option for you. And so that's how we're looking at it now, is how do we, as Stacey mentioned, decide which events are worth the amount of time that it takes to produce a virtual event, which is a lot more time than an in-person event, without the same amount of revenue. But then also partner with our community who also produce events that we're part of, large events, and determine then what the future of those look like.
I will tell you that as a very small new bookstore that doesn't have a big space to host a lot of folks in, we have not been very successful at getting many authors in our store. And I've been really upset about that, because we, you know, I mean, of course I get it that authors want to go to bookstores that's going to yield a lot of money in terms of book sales. However, not every new independent bookstore, we're going to be 3 in December, has the reach and or the space. And so there's something very special about small bookstores that's in the smack dead in the middle of a community, that I'm hoping that publishers really begin to sort of encourage their authors to do some of these small spaces, like myself. You know, I don't know what, you know, like when people do community service, consider it community service, some goodwill to, you know, to up and coming bookstores. But we've really struggled to do that, and now thinking about how, you know, now it's even more difficult to sort of get those folks to pay attention to new and up and coming bookstores who haven't been on the map and don't have the space to host 600 people, you know?
Yeah, we didn't do events for most of my time here, and then we opened a new store about 5 years ago, and we did it with events in mind. So we did create a space. It's not huge, but we started an events program there, and we kept going through this largely because the staff wanted to, and because we had a few authors that we knew personally in the Bay Area who had books coming out at the worst time. And we just sort of felt for them, and we literally had to figure it out. Like, you know, all right, I know how to use Zoom. How do I use Zoom without letting crazy people say what they want? How do you use Zoom and, you know, manage questions and answers? We're all good at that now, I think. But, you know, we largely did it because either the authors wanted or needed it, or our community was asking for it. They said, I don't have anything to do, you know. I think our first few were really successful. We sold 120 copies of Why We Swim by Bonnie Swee, because we're dialed into the swimming community here, and a lot of us are part of that. So we knew our community, but also because it was May 5th and everyone was just locked at home for 6 weeks, and people weren't doing a lot of online events. But the more that other stores did it, the more that organizations got on the ball, the more the kids' sports teams started meeting on Zoom. You know, people got real Zoom fatigue. It's great to see that Penguin Random House has stepped up to support financially some of their author events, and I kind of hope that the more publishers see that it's not working the way it used to be, and if they want us to keep doing these, there's costs associated with it. We all hope to come out the other side and get back to what was normal. But in the meanwhile, as everyone else has said, it shouldn't be more work. I don't know why it's more work, but it is. And the sales are definitely a lot lower than they were before.
Well, and it's a good point that the future is still kind of undetermined right now, right? We're still going week to week and riding the wave of this pandemic and the changes that it's brought in the whole book space. So I want to encourage all of the participants, where we have about 15 minutes left roughly. If you have questions, please submit them through the Q&A button. And we'll get to questions in hopefully the last 5 or 10 minutes of our program tonight. So before we get there though, let's switch gears and talk about that future, not just the unknowns around events and unknowns around timing and consumers' shopping habits. How about each of you, can you contribute your perspective on where you think the future over the next year or so might be going? The future for bookstores.
No one's unmuting. Go, Charlie.
Because it's so unknown. I'm here in New York, and we thought that we were on our way, right? Like New York was slammed. There was no other state in the country and no other city in the country that went through what we went through. And we thought that we were well on our way. And now we are regressing. And for me, I will tell you that a lot of my community members have been talking about the inability to concentrate, the inability to move through an entire book. And so I think that first of all, if we want to talk like meta and spiritual, we are all going through a collective traumatic experience, number one. And number two, we are all going through a fatigue that I don't think that we've ever experienced as a society right now. And number three, our government, we haven't mentioned the impact of our government on small businesses, on our mental health as small business owners, and how our communities are responding to that. So when you talk about the trends in book sales, for us, it's a lot of, because we're a feminist bookstore, it's a lot of books on burnout that's coming from a feminist perspective, but also a lot of politically geared books. So for me, in the future, I see that we are going to continuously be asked to pivot and to shift and to respond to a new normal that we have no idea what that new normal is. I think a lot of our sales are going to continue to be online because the second wave is worse than the first wave. And I think that we're going to go through a sense of distrust at some point about being around one another until the vaccine is fully disseminated in our country. So I don't see Café con Libros moving back to a space where we held events in our space. I do not see that. I don't even have the mental or spiritual wherewithal to handle the anxiety that will come with that, even with a vaccine. So for me, I see that my work is going to be building a muscle around online engagement, recruitment, outreach, retaining, and building community.
And maybe as each of you answer this, you can also talk about, with the future being unknown, since none of us are fortune tellers, what can the book community do to help with this future?
I'm going to say that Kalima hit everything right on the head. What we're doing now isn't sustainable in a long period of time. How she was talking about the social unrest that happened in June and how it spiraled her business, kind of spinning your wheels. We were diverting sales to also Black-owned bookstores because we wanted to do the right thing, but we also found ourselves spinning our wheels at the same exact time and having to shut down our website. And so I think that the future of bookselling and bookstores, as we know, we're innovative people. We've gotten this far, but without leadership, I don't know how much further that bookstores can sustain, as Kalima said, being on our own to do everything all the time and figure it out. I think we need new leadership and we need guidelines, and it's not specifically for bookstores, it's for all small businesses. And we just need more leadership and better leadership. And what we need is for the future, the reality is, if you want us here next year, you have to shop with us this year. And if that means that it takes a week to get your book and not 8 hours, then that is something that you're going to have to come, our consumers, our customers, they're just going to have to come to terms with that. Independent bookstores were never meant to be online bookstores. We've never tried it. We've never strived to do that. And we don't want to do it, but it's the situation that we're in. And this is how we're connecting with our community right now, because it's our means. And the community, the best way to support us is just to continue to support us and not Amazon.
Yeah, I'll echo that. This is the time to support those places that nourish you culturally, politically. They won't be there when you're actually maybe feeling comfortable to enter those spaces if you don't shop there now. And shopping there now doesn't mean that if you don't feel safe, you don't have to go into our spaces, but to pay attention to our websites, to see the things that we have on offer for sale. That's hugely important. And yeah, I think it's conscious buying. And I do think that, there's always going to be people who, have a Prime Amazon account, and there's no arguing with that. And I know I'm a hypocrite. I have to shop at Target and Walgreens, and, no one can be a complete purist, but I do think a lot about where, my paycheck is going. And maybe people in the independent bookstore community have always had that kind of feeling. You understand that in a significant way. So, that's really the message. If you want to see these bookstores, these restaurants, these cafes survive, it's obvious. We need to find ways to patronize them, whether it's takeout, curbside, online, and that a business has to have an active website presence. City Lights is funneling money into that. Everybody else is too. If you don't have that, you don't really have a shot, even though, as Charlie was saying, that's not the way that independent bookstores were ever supposed to be presenting their books and, and asking customers to discover them. But if you don't take it seriously, I don't think you're going to survive.
Thanks, Stacey. And Pete, let's hear from you. And we've got a lot of great questions. Let's hear your perspective on it.
I'm torn between, as a small business owner, you're supposed to be an optimist. So we have to come from that point of view. I've been telling my wife for 25 years that this is all going to fall apart at some point. And I finally thought in March I was right. I said, yes, it is going to all end. It's all over. And I was wrong again. So there's some balance between sort of one day at a time. Let's just get through today. Our staff is stressed out. Everyone's scared. And let's just get through this. But as Kalima said, you can only do that for so long before it takes a toll. So then the other attitude is this too shall pass. At some point this will be over and we'll be able to hug each other again, and we can have a crowded event and a glass of wine. So it's just trying to take everything we've learned from what's been going on, where we were forced to improve and have improved, and then reclaim what we did well before. We only survived, indie stores are only still here, despite Amazon always having everything for cheaper and faster, because people like to come and browse and interact with other people. So we got to just be ready to recapture that and take that back. I noticed somebody asked did I mention the PRH supporting events, and they asked what other publishers can do. And honestly, the business model before this was broken. The fact that we get 45% off of books or 40% off of books, and I can sometimes find books cheaper on Amazon than I can from my publishers. We frankly just need more margin. Every year our payroll goes up, every year our health insurance goes up, and every year our rent goes up. And we can't increase the prices of books. So we just need more percentage points. We just need a better discount. If publishers could go to 55%, you would have a renaissance of indie bookstores popping up all over the place, profitable business models, stopping all their complaints about whatever that we complain about all the time. And you'd have to take, 1/10 of a penny out of Jeff Bezos's pocketbook to do that. So, That's my thoughts. If that's what publishers can do, is give us 10 more points.
Well, thank you all. This has been really great. And we also have some really great questions because it's a good discussion. We may go 5 minutes over. I'm being told that is okay. So for participants, if you'd like to hang tight for 5 minutes over, that way we can tackle as many questions as possible. So we're going to start with one of the ones around how do you make your website more browsable? How did you do that? Is that a simple one for you to answer, Charley?
Yeah, so we have an e-commerce website, and there's a lot of things that we didn't know we could do, but there's an actual function where you turn on browse, and it has like all of these categories, and that was not even turned on our website. So number one, there's a browse function that you can turn on. And number two, what we're doing is we're taking all of our displays that are in the store and we're making them as book list online. So if someone walks in the store and they usually go upstairs and there's a table at the top of the stairs that they always like to shop, we make that online. And so we're making that book list online. We're taking a picture of the sign that the inventory manager made to put on top of the table so that they can find their normal displays in the store online.
Thanks. Now here's one for the whole group. Has anyone tried private book talk appointments?
We didn't. We considered it for a while. Customers were asking us, they so wanted to be in the store that they'd ask us to do FaceTime live. And literally we'd walk around with a phone and browse for them. And that was just not something we could pull off. We did offer, there were a couple of sort of VIP customers, and before we were officially allowed to open, we'd let them come in by themselves for an hour and browse, but that felt a little dirty. So we stopped.
I'm assuming the question is for money, and we have not looked at it for money, but we do offer book talks to schools and book fairs. Yeah. Okay. Digital ones. Mm-hmm.
Right. Here's another one. How are you handling browsers? In other words, people who want to just walk around in the bookstore and touch books. How are you helping browser shoppers?
Come on in. We have mask requirements. We ask everyone to sanitize their hand when they walk in. We have signs about social distancing. So for the moment where we are, San Francisco 2-3 weeks ago was down to 3 cases per 100,000 people. It was excellent. We were in the lowest tier in California. We lost that all in 3 weeks. It's tripled. So we're at 9 or 10, which is still way lower than a lot of parts of the country. But we are still allowed to be open, and we have browsers. We try to keep the windows open and the doors open as much as possible. As Stacey said, we worry about crowds during the holidays, but it hasn't happened yet. So if and when there was one day when the store was too crowded, so we stopped letting people in at a certain point. We just announced on the intercom, hey, if you've been here for more than 15-20 minutes, give someone else a turn. We're really happy to see you, but we want more customers to get to experience this. And I think that'll happen more in December, and we're ready for that. The message is just, be careful. So the risk of picking up COVID from touching a book that someone else touched is apparently pretty minimal. So while we still have the hand sanitizer, and it feels a little more performative than absolutely necessary, but we try to do everything we can to make people feel welcome and safe. And we watch the reviews on Google and Yelp and that kind of thing. And we see that customers appreciate it, even though there's 1 or 2 crazies that don't.
That's great. Here's another good question. So besides the support for events you mentioned PRH is offering, what do you wish any mid-sized publisher would do now to support your store to help increase sales? Sounds like there were some successful innovations this fall regarding regional trade shows. How can publishers help you be more effective, or the trade shows for you more useful to you?
That's a really good question. For me personally, again, as a new bookstore, I think that publishers, I think for me, it's really about relationship building. I'm a Black feminist, and I'm mission driven, and my ideology comes from that. And I find that developing strong relationships with the publishers has been very difficult, and I think it's because, again, I believe because I'm not as big as BookPeople or City Lights, it's really about how much money that my particular small business can generate for that publisher. But again, I think that there's a need for them to embrace us as well, and to extend themselves, and to sort of help us sort of work our way through the industry, and to make us to help us understand the industry better. I really do think it's about relationship building, and I know that's a lot to ask of publishers because they have a lot on their plates as well. But this is a very unique industry. This is really all about relationships, all about understanding who we are as booksellers, and what our community needs. So I definitely want to see more outreach and more communication, more town halls where we can come together and bring different bookstores together to talk about what's going on, to share ideas, what's going on with the publishers, to talk about ways that we can uplift certain specific demographics, like Black women authors who tend to get the lower end of the stick in terms of their books being elevated and even being available for purchase. So these are things that they won't hear until there's like a commotion around it, when it doesn't have to be a commotion and could just be a dialogue that folks are committed to with their independent bookstores, despite the size. I'm a small baby.
Yeah, I would encourage publishers and authors too. If there's an author is an advocate of a particular bookstore and they have a new book coming out, organize events or signings that are focused like in partnership with stores, so that you're directing the energy and traffic towards one particular place. And if the author wants to support numerous stores, well, give it some time. Don't domino it. So one day after the next, because then you're sort of undercutting the bookstore that you're intending to support.
I feel like for the larger publishers that don't have like an individual consumer retail outlet, what does it look like for them to talk to their authors about what Stacey said, their home bookstore, and on their website make their home bookstore where you buy the book from. You go and you visit and you always see, I know Bookshop is getting a lot more buy buttons on a lot of different things, but what does it look like to land on Random House and every author has their home bookstore #1 rather than Books A Million Pound, Book Barnes, and all the other things? Just sales from your local authors that your author can choose to be directed to you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for author education. Authors, they write the book, which should be enough. That's got to be the hardest part. But then they have to become their own marketing arms, and then they work with their publicist and their publisher and their editor. And I think there is a lot that can be done to educate authors on how to approach indies, how to get their books stocked there, and how to really partner with one or two stores to be the nexus or the hub for signed copies.
Right. Can I just say, Charley, you just sparked something in my head. There, one of the ways that I just want to go back to one of the questions about how folks can support local bookstore owners. Bookshop is a great vehicle for many of us, right? But now Bookshop is allowing big corporations, book clubs, all different types of folks to have buttons on the Bookshop page, which is creating competition on some levels with bookstores. Now, I don't have a problem with the book clubs in specifically, but I do have a problem when like a media outlet reaches out to me and they ask me to curate a list of books for them. And when they say buy here, they're buying here through their Bookshop page and not my Bookshop page. I have a problem with that. So I just want to say to the community that buy from the local bookstore. Don't buy from BuzzFeed. Don't buy from, like all these other major media outlets that they don't need your $27. We do. And so you really triggered that in my head, Charley, because there is just so many people getting into this industry. is a lucrative industry, and we need to redirect folks to the folks who really need the money.
Well, thank you all. I think this has been a really great discussion. We have some other questions, and so what we'll do is those of you who've submitted some questions, we'll try to get those answered by the panelists and send them to you separately. This concludes our time. I want to echo something that came in through the Q&A, and someone has remarked that this is a great group of booksellers, and I appreciate the ideas, optimism, honesty, and energy. Thank you. So I want to extend the same thing. Thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you for supporting our book community, the buyers, the consumers, the publishers, and thank you for your transparency and your thoughts in tonight's discussion.
Thanks for being at the table.
Thanks for having me.
I just want to echo that last comment, and it was really a fantastic conversation. You left us all with a tremendous amount of food for thought. And thank you all very, very much again for participating. And I'm just going to end by saying, if you would like, on December 15th, I promise another great program. We're going to be talking about insights into the rapidly growing stationery and journal market, which I know also sells in bookstores. So again, thank you all so much for everything that you contributed tonight.